I remember when I first started working with hand tools and specifically hand sawing, how excited I was when I just discovered the marking knife or a marking gauge. It sounds silly, but actually scratching a line into the wood made precision joinery cuts so much easier. It gave me something physical I could drop a chisel into or run a square up against, or take my saw and drop the saw into. And I like to describe it when you've got a knife line in the wood and you start cutting with a saw, it kind of sucks the saw in. Those fibers are already severed, and in many ways it allows the path to follow the path of least resistance where those fibers have already been severed. And it's a great way to get right on your line to get really precise cuts. But it's funny, in recent years, and especially with things like dovetails, I found myself using a pencil more than a knife, because the fact that the knife line sucks that saw in, sometimes I don't want that. Sometimes I want a saw next to my line. Sometimes I want to leave the line, or sometimes I'm working on like a really soft wood and I want to leave even a little bit more than the line so I can get a little bit more compression into the joint. Well, sometimes that doesn't work at all, and I still need that knife line. I need that precise layout, but I want a saw next to the knife line. Well, I did a lesson a while ago in the hand tool school about sawing next to the knife line. It comes up a lot in things like bridle joints, like having this miter square and this 90-degree square. Or more importantly, in furniture, it comes up a lot in frame and panel joinery, where you may plow a groove and then need to saw next to that groove for the tenon. So what you're about to see is an excerpt from that lesson entitled Sawing Next to the Line, or How to Leave Your Knife Line. It's a particularly powerful technique that I think you'll find reaches far beyond cutting bridles and cutting frame and panel joinery. It's a level of precision that you ask of your handsaw that can allow you to kind of pivot and react on the fly to fix maybe a tenon when the first cut went a little awry. Say you got a situation where you have two rails, two stiles, but then you've got that crossbar, what you might call a mullion or a muntin, whether it's a window or a door. And on that mullion, you're going to have a groove on one side and a groove on the other side. So how do you go about cutting the tenon on this? Well, the easy answer is cut the tenon before you plow the groove. But a lot of us, rightfully so, plow the grooves first, especially in frame and panel, because it locates where your mortises go. It helps all the layout. You set up your plow plane, and then you can set all your tooling, your layout gauges and everything from the groove you've created. So here is my piece, and I've darkened in my tenon lines here, and you can see the issue. The tenon, well, let me say the groove lays out the width of the mortise, which means the tenon needs to fit inside that groove. So if I come in with a saw and I run that saw along the inside wall of the groove, I'm going to reduce the thickness of my tenon by the width of the kerf. And in other words, I'll be removing this line and a bit of the waste on the inside. So when I come in and saw it, I have to actually saw to the outside of the lines and ideally leave that knife line. My standard method for sawing a tenon is generally to start on the near edge, dropping my handle and running a line down that face. Well, to do that, I would have to actually saw right on the edge of the tenon. In other words, I would have no wood on this side of the saw to kind of support it, and it's constantly going to want to run into the groove. So in this instance, I'm actually going to start along the top, but I'm not going to start on the near side. I'm going to start on the far side of the cut. Now this can be a little bit awkward, but it's important to know how to do this. And the reason I say it's awkward because as the saw is running down, it's essentially running against the grain. As the fibers are coming up this way, the saw is driving down. And it wants to kind of spelch to blow out these fibers in the back side. So the saw is going to be a little bit harder to start. It's going to vibrate a little bit more. It's all more important to lift the weight off the toe as you make this cut. But the key is I'm going to start positioning my saw so that it's resting outside the line. And very slowly, I'm dropping the handle and tracing my line back across the end so that I've set a kerf that has left the line and is essentially sawing into the wall of this groove. Let's do that again, but on the other side, and you can see real close. I'm going to position my fingers, pinch the wood. I'm actually just setting on top of the wood, and I'm going to push the saw so that it's outside my line. Very light, and this is not one of those instances where you want to commit to the cut. You'll notice I'm taking very short strokes. These fingers are acting like training wheels. And as I drop the handle down and I move the kerf back along the edge, I'm moving my fingers back ever so slightly. So now I've cut the kerf, the pencil line, you can see a hint of pencil line there and a hint of pencil line there. More importantly, you can see a kerf that actually runs into the walls of the groove. It's not disappearing at the bottom of the groove, it's disappearing out here. So now with those edges or that kerf established, I'm going to cut down a little bit deeper, and now I can drop the handle down and saw down this side. And you see, as I make this cut, I've got this little tiny flap where I'm removing the inside of the wall. I'm sticking to the outside, which means all of the kerf needs to be shunted into this little wall left from the groove. And you're going to end up with this little flap, or sometimes depending on how wide the kerf is, this flap can even be kind of just destroyed and turned into sawdust. The important part is with the groove, or the kerf rather, established across the top, I can really focus on staying in there sawing down to whatever my baseline is. Then I can flip the whole thing around, repeat it on the other side, and here you'll see the same thing. The kerf lies in, we'll just call this the tongue. This is the cheek that needs to come away when we saw down to the baseline. But with the kerf established across the end grain, I can run down the side finish off my cheek cut, and again, you can see I've got that little flap. In reality, this tenon is probably going to be a hair too fat, but a couple of passes with a block plane or with a router plane, I'll clean up those cheeks and it'll be a nice piston fit, which is a heck of a lot better than it being dramatically loose right off the saw. I challenge you to go into your shop and plow a groove in a board and then try to saw right on the wall of that groove and put what I've just shown you into practice. You'd be surprised how many times you find yourself needing this when you're sawing tenons or dovetails or really any kind of precision. Being able to leave that line, it's a great arrow to have in your quiver. So again, this is all just a big advertisement for the Hand Tool School if you haven't figured that out. I've got lots of lessons like this in the Hand Tool School, more than 600 at last count. And specifically, I've started to release what I'm calling skills paths, where I'm curating together a bunch of different lessons around a topic and building a step-by-step curriculum. And I've just released one on hand sawing. This lesson actually, interestingly enough, I didn't include it in the skills path because there were so many others that were better suited. But it's a new feature in the Hand Tool School and a new product that's available. I've got this sawing path. I'm working on one on cutting dados. I've got a hand plane one coming up, and I've released one on mortise and tenon joinery. They're all visible on the lesson sales page in the Hand Tool School. That's handtoolschool.net/lessons, or just go to handtoolschool.net. You'll find all the links and everything there as well. But this lesson that you just saw, like I said, it's an example of hundreds and hundreds of different lessons that are in the school. I'd love for you to check out the Hand Tool School. I'd love for you to join us. Certainly there's a lot of education available, but I gotta tell you, our community forum has got to be one of the friendliest, most helpful places on the internet. So check us out. Thanks for watching this video. More to come soon.